At 6:47 on a Tuesday morning, inside a locked conference room on the fourth floor of Ottawa's Langevin block, something took place that not one major American news organization has touched. Mark Carney, Canada's freshly sworn-in Prime Minister, put his signature on a document, not a press release, not a diplomatic memo, a binding trilateral economic coordination agreement with two of the United States' most essential trading partners, executed in total silence, with no cameras present, and without Washington receiving so much as a heads-up until the ink was already dry. What unfolded inside that room over the following 40 minutes is going to fundamentally alter the economic dynamic between the United States and Canada in ways that Donald Trump's inner circle is only now beginning to grasp. And what I'm about to walk you through is not conjecture or educated guessing. This is a detailed reconstruction drawn from direct knowledge provided by three separate individuals who were briefed on the signing within hours of it happening. Put everything else aside for a moment, because the gravity of what I'm about to describe demands your full attention. This isn't simply a trade dispute story. It isn't just a Canada story. This is the story of how a former central banker, in a single methodical morning, handed Donald Trump the most significant economic blow of his second term, and did it so quietly that the White House press corps is still scrambling to catch up. If the trajectory of the American economy over the next 90 days matters to you at all, subscribe to this channel right now and enable notifications, because what comes out of Ottawa in the next 72 hours will determine whether Trump's entire tariff strategy holds together or falls apart. Here is what we know. According to three sources with direct familiarity with the matter, two of them with first-hand access to Canadian cabinet-level conversations, and one maintaining close ties with European diplomatic personnel stationed in Ottawa, the agreement Carney signed on Tuesday morning was not assembled on short notice. It had been 14 days in the making. The timing was entirely intentional. It was executed on the precise morning that Trump's 25% tariffs on Canadian goods officially went into effect, and it was architected to be the kind of response that no phone call, no social media post, and no presidential threat could reverse. Sources briefed on the document's contents described it as a structured economic coordination framework, not a formal trade treaty requiring any legislative approval, but a binding executive instrument that simultaneously activates synchronized retaliatory mechanisms across three separate economies. The evidence trail is concrete. Publicly available flight tracking data confirms that a Canadian government aircraft departed Ottawa's Macdonald-Cartier International Airport at 11:22 p.m. on Sunday, February 28th, landing in Brussels at 9:14 a.m. local time on Monday morning. A source with direct knowledge of who was on that plane confirmed that two senior officials from Canada's Department of Finance were aboard. They flew back on a commercial flight Tuesday evening after the document had already been signed in Ottawa through secure digital execution protocols. All of this coordination happened simultaneously across time zones, while Trump's trade team was still issuing public statements about Canadian compliance. Now let me take you through exactly how we arrived here, because the sequence of events is everything. This did not materialize from nowhere. It was a chain of decisions, provocations, and critical strategic errors, every one of them documented. And to truly understand why Carney's move is so damaging to Trump's position, you have to first understand who Mark Carney is and why Trump's team fundamentally misread him from day one. Start with the man himself. Mark Carney is not a politician in any form that Trump's advisors would recognize or know how to categorize. He is a former governor of the Bank of Canada. He is a former governor of the Bank of England. He steered two of the most important central banking institutions in the Western world through some of the most severe financial crises of the modern era. His understanding of leverage, real leverage, the kind that moves bond markets and reshapes currency valuations, operates at a level that no one currently in the Trump White House can match. When Carney entered the Liberal Party leadership race in January of this year, Washington's prevailing assumption was that he would be manageable. He was classified as a technocrat, not a combatant. That assumption was miscalculation number one. The sequence starts on February 1st, when Trump signed the executive order imposing 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, effective March 4th. The stated justification was fentanyl trafficking and border security. The actual strategic intent, according to three people familiar with internal White House deliberations, was economic coercion, forcing Canada back to the SUSMA negotiating table under conditions considerably more favorable to American manufacturing interests. Trump had run this same playbook before. It had delivered results before. The logic was clean. Canada's economy is far too reliant on American trade to sustain a prolonged tariff shock. Apply the pressure, wait for surrender, claim the win, what the calculation failed to account for entirely. On February 15th, Mark Carney won the Liberal Party leadership with 85.9% of the vote, the largest mandate in the party's modern history. 2 days later, he was sworn in as Prime Minister. He issued exactly one public statement about the tariffs. He described them as a fundamental challenge to Canadian sovereignty. He did not threaten retaliation. He did not pick up the phone to call Trump. He went silent, and that silence, according to sources close to the Carney transition team, was not a sign of weakness. It was preparation. If you're getting value from this breakdown, hit the like button right now, because what I'm about to go through next is the part that virtually every American commentator has completely missed, and it changes the entire picture. Throughout the final 2 weeks of February, while Canadian and American officials appeared publicly to be engaged in ordinary diplomatic exchange, calls between trade ministers, background briefings hinting at possible exemptions, measured statements about ongoing dialogue, something else was happening altogether. According to two sources briefed directly on the coordination process, Canadian officials were conducting parallel, confidential conversations with counterparts in the European Union and in one additional major Pacific economy. The visible diplomatic activity was deliberate misdirection. It was engineered to signal to Washington that Canada was still at the table, still pursuing a managed resolution, while the actual strategic framework was being built in complete silence. This is where the story becomes genuinely significant, and I need you to subscribe right now if you haven't yet, because the next section reveals what Carney actually signed and why it removes Trump's most powerful economic tool against Canada. The document, executed Tuesday morning, according to sources with first-hand knowledge of its contents, contains 3 core mechanisms. The first is a synchronized tariff response protocol. Canada's retaliatory tariffs on American goods are now formally linked to corresponding measures from the other signatories, structured to activate in stages rather than all at once. That sequencing matters enormously. It prevents Trump from isolating Canada and cutting a bilateral deal while leaving the broader pressure architecture intact. Every time Washington attempts to negotiate a separate agreement with Ottawa, the other signatories' measures remain operational, sustaining economic pressure without requiring Canada to hold the line on its own. The second mechanism is a currency coordination provision. According to a source familiar with the technical annexes of the document, this element establishes a framework for coordinated central bank communication, not direct intervention, but coordinated communication, in the event that American trade policy generates acute volatility in the valuation of the Canadian dollar. Given that Carney himself spent years as a central bank governor, this provision reflects a degree of financial sophistication that is simply absent on the American side of this confrontation. He is competing in a game his opponents have not fully studied. The third mechanism is the one the Trump administration should find most alarming. It is a supply chain diversification commitment, a structured, time-bound plan to reduce Canadian export dependence on American markets across 4 specific commodity sectors. According to a source briefed on the annex, those sectors are aluminum, softwood lumber, agricultural products, and energy components. The timeline is 18 months. If carried through, it fundamentally transforms the math of tariff coercion against Canada, because the mechanism through which tariffs generate leverage, namely Canadian export vulnerability, begins to erode in a systematic and deliberate way. Hit the like button if you understand why this goes far beyond an immediate trade spat, because the implications here extend well past Canada's borders. What Carney has constructed is a template, and that template is already being examined in other capitals around the world. Now here is where the escalation turns genuinely critical, and I want you to stay focused, because this is the piece that should reframe how you think about Trump's tariff strategy on a global scale. According to former trade policy official Catherine Ramsey, who served in the Office of the United States Trade Representative across 2 previous administrations, and who spoke with legal observers this week, the specific architecture of Carney's coordination agreement was deliberately designed to function outside CUSMA's dispute resolution mechanisms. That is not a coincidence. It means the United States cannot challenge this agreement through the established treaty framework. The legal pathway Washington would normally rely on to contest coordinated retaliation simply does not reach this instrument. As constitutional trade law scholar Professor Michael Brennan of the University of Toronto Faculty of Law explained in analysis published Tuesday evening, The coordination framework is structured as executive economic policy rather than a trade agreement, which places it in a category that American legal challenges would find extremely difficult to penetrate. And the situation continues to worsen for the Trump position. Multiple sources familiar with internal discussions at Canada's Finance Ministry confirmed Tuesday that Carney has already declined two informal requests from Washington for a direct bilateral call between himself and Trump before the end of the week. The reasoning, according to a source close to the Prime Minister's office, is entirely calculated. Carney will not take a call with Trump until the coordination agreement's first retaliatory mechanisms have been publicly activated. A call before that moment creates an opening for Trump to declare he negotiated a solution. Carney wants the mechanisms running before any conversation begins. He wants the leverage firmly established before negotiations open. This is central bank discipline applied to geopolitics, and it is something Trump has not encountered at this level of sophistication. Here is what I am tracking over the next 48 hours, and if you're not subscribed with notifications enabled, you are going to miss the moment this becomes impossible to ignore. Canada's first retaliatory tariff tranche is scheduled to activate Thursday morning. According to sources with knowledge of the schedule, it imposes 25% duties on roughly $30 billion worth of American goods, with the specific product list calibrated towards sectors located in American states that voted for Trump in 2024. That calibration is not accidental. It is a political calculation designed to generate domestic pressure on Republican senators from affected states before any coherent White House negotiating position can be assembled. What happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether this standoff moves toward a negotiated resolution or slides into a sustained economic conflict that neither government has fully prepared for. The clock is running, the mechanisms are active, and Carney has structured the situation so that the opening move always belongs to Canada. Let me bring all of this together, because we are now at the point where the full picture comes into focus. What Mark Carney signed on Tuesday morning was not a defensive reaction to a trade provocation. It was a preemptive strategic repositioning executed by someone who understands economic leverage at its highest institutional level against an opponent who has consistently assumed that economic coercion produces uniform results across all relationships. Canada has formally challenged that assumption, and the architecture Carney constructed makes it structurally difficult for Trump to reverse course without conceding ground he has publicly vowed to hold. 3 scenarios are now on the table, and I've assigned a probability to each based on everything my sources have described. Scenario 1, I'm calling it managed de-escalation. I give a 25% probability. In this scenario, the scale of coordinated retaliation, and specifically the political exposure of Republican senators in affected manufacturing states, generates enough internal White House pressure that Trump agrees to a 90-day suspension of the Canadian tariffs in exchange for renewed CUSMA negotiations. Carney accepts. The coordination framework is paused but not dismantled. Both sides declare a partial win. This scenario requires Trump to absorb a visible retreat, which his political psychology makes extremely difficult. Scenario 2, sustained economic confrontation. I give a 45% probability, making it the most likely outcome. Both sides activate their retaliatory mechanisms fully. Economic damage mounts over 60 to 90 days. Negotiations begin only after both governments have absorbed enough domestic political pain to justify a compromise. The coordination agreement remains in force throughout, meaning Canada never finds itself negotiating from a position of isolation. This scenario is damaging for both economies, but structurally more survivable for Canada than for Trump's political standing. Scenario 3, institutional rupture. I give a 20% probability. In this scenario, Trump responds to Carney's refusal to take his calls, not with negotiation but with escalation, additional tariffs, threats directed at Canadian financial institutions, or executive actions targeting Canadian energy exports. Carney responds by accelerating the supply chain diversification timeline. The relationship between the two countries enters a sustained period of deterioration that outlasts both governments. The damage to American soft power in this scenario is generational. There is a fourth scenario that I assign a 10% probability, but believe is critically underappreciated. I'm calling it the precedent cascade. In this scenario, the Carney coordination framework becomes a model that other American trading partners, specifically those currently navigating their own tariff confrontations with Washington, adopt and adapt. Within 90 days, the United States finds itself facing coordinated retaliatory structures from multiple directions simultaneously, each one legally insulated from American challenge and politically engineered to maximize pressure on Republican constituencies. This scenario doesn't require any single country to defeat Trump economically. It only requires that enough countries adopt Carney's template, that the cumulative pressure becomes unmanageable. Given what sources are telling me about conversations currently underway in Seoul, Tokyo, and Brussels, this scenario may be significantly underpriced at 10%. But here is why this matters beyond any single trade dispute, beyond any single prime minister, beyond any single agreement signed in a secure Ottawa conference room before most of Washington had poured its morning coffee. This is a live stress test of a core assumption that has driven American trade policy for 4 years, that economic coercion works universally, that size determines leverage, that the largest economy in the room always prevails. Carney's move is the first systematic challenge to that assumption from a country that has historically been Washington's most accommodating trading partner. If it works, if Canada weathers this confrontation without breaking, then every government currently absorbing American trade pressure will study the blueprint and ask one very simple question: why didn't we think of this first? So what does this mean for you personally? Because I know many of you watching right now are wondering whether any of this touches your retirement accounts, your cost of living, your energy costs. The answer is yes, and the timeline is short. Reach out to your senators and representatives, especially if you live in a manufacturing state, and demand accountability for the economic consequences of tariff escalation without a clearly defined strategy. Constituent pressure from affected states is the very variable that Scenario 1 depends on. History has repeatedly shown it works when it is organized and sustained. Subscribe to this channel right now, because in the next 72 hours, Canada's first retaliatory mechanisms go live. The White House will issue a response, and I will have the full breakdown before the spin operation has a chance to define the narrative. Turn on notifications, because this story moves quickly, and the details are everything. The clock is running, the retaliatory timeline is active. Carney has engineered this, so the first chapter concludes entirely on his terms, and the question that every analyst in Washington is now asking, quietly, behind closed doors, is the same one I want to leave you with tonight. Did Trump just come face to face with the one opponent his entire playbook was never designed to handle? Drop your answer in the comments below. Do you think Canada holds the line, or does this all end with a phone call and a handshake deal? I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know what you think happens next.